Yeah, so I think there are a number of things, and almost at least in our firm's mind, very very positive things. So certainly the talent piece, and JJU hit on it, Sam hit on it. I think that's one of the things in particular that always jumps out at us when we start working on a project and looking at the Denver areas is the talent, both between the high school degree, but also almost 42% of the workforce having a bachelor's degree or higher. That's obviously phenomenal, and that ranking as the second most educated or the highest educational attainment in the country is also very impressive. So I think talent certainly is significant. Secondly, the fact that that area has continued to see robust growth that ties in obviously very closely to the talent aspect of it, but also just shows kind of forward momentum in that area, which is always important to see as we as a site selection firm work on projects, but also often is asked by our clients. I think another thing I would note with all the growth that the area has had, there's been a real conscious effort on investing in infrastructure for a long period of time. I mean, obviously, the new airport many years ago was a huge investment, but things that have been done with roads, but also in particular with light rail and the robustness of that light rail system, the fact that it continues to be built out and serve so many areas in the metro area, I think is impressive, and certainly the higher education assets that are in place too, both public and private, are terrific.
Absolutely. So I think you're doing a lot of things really well. Perception is you've got outdoor access, you've got room to roam, I think is the phrase. Housing is perceived as expensive, but no community is perfect. I think what I see trending, and I think Denver's well positioned with this, is that it's much more increasingly important that communities are diverse and open-minded, and that the community reflects or has a feel to it that reflects the company's own culture, and that again can range everything from diversity, equity, inclusion, political persuasion, all those types of things. Sometimes those headlines can do headlines of bills passing, one polarizing one way or the other, can do a lot to attract the attention of a company who's very well aligned with that position, or turn a lot of companies away who are not. So I hear consistent messaging that Colorado is, neutral and open and diverse. And I think, again, so I think you're positioning yourself well, but that's something I see growing in importance.
I would say a couple things, and you guys are already mindful of this, I know from my conversations with Sam. Certainly what you touched on earlier regarding the rapid escalation and not only housing prices, but some significant inflation too as it relates just to overall real estate costs for businesses. You can't obviously directly control all of that, but I think on the housing side in particular, continuing to look at workforce housing and how you manage that in the region, knowing the economy is continuing to grow and probably continue to diversify moving forward, will be important. And then I think the other thing to point to is just also what you're continuing to do to protect that quality of place and invest in quality of place. So quality of place again links very closely to talent. Denver's had a long history investing in quality of place, and I suspect that'll continue. But at the same time, with all the growth that's taking place there, how do you continue to protect all those outdoor recreational assets and continue to support arts and cultural and sports organizations in this unusual time we find ourselves in? I think a lot of places, understandably, with tax revenues, declining from some period of time for local communities and states, it definitely would be a mistake to walk away from those quality of place and infrastructure and talent investments, because I think it would really hurt the area going forward. So those are just some observations to share. But again, generally positive. And again, it's always great to have a professional first-class organization like yours to work with, because it gives us a high degree of confidence that we can move through a process with our clients and know that what is said to us is something we can count on.
couple of other factors, maybe kind of beyond what was listed. Again, you've got to have affordable housing for all levels of employees, but also things like transit access, which it sounds like, again, there's been significant improvements in that area, but that helps when what the homes that are affordable are so much further out. Transit makes them accessible to the central core. The other thing I've seen a renewed emphasis or interest in from clients is access to education, higher education, not specifically schools and private education. That's, of course, remains important, but more again for their employees to have opportunities to advance in the community, which is almost counterintuitive because every employer wants to keep their employees, but at the same time, they more and more recognize that to be successful, they need mobility. And so there needs to be a place to grab talent from that's coming up, and a place for their talent to continue to grow, whether that's within their firm or elsewhere. So that sort of industry cluster, but the educational assets that surround it, and having strong partner educational entities who will work with an employer and offer customized education and things like that, or even some sort of in-kind workforce development or training benefit that is, again, a pass-through benefit to their employees.
I would absolutely sprinkle as much money as I could in education, and I'd sprinkle in the infrastructure. When I talk about infrastructure, there are a lot of locations. We don't need to pick on all of them. One of them happens to be Austin, for example, that let tremendous and explosive growth kind of run unbridled. And what has happened is the infrastructure has not been able to keep up with the growth. And when that happens, and Sam, you grew up in Chicago, you can tell me what I-90 looks like any day of the week. Kyle can attest. It's impossible to get around the city, COVID or non-COVID. And we've got highways and infrastructures and public transit that was built and executed upon for far less people than it uses every day. That same gripe can be tapped onto the I-95 corridor. It can be tapped on Georgia. It can be hit on parts of Dallas on the metro. So don't let great, explosive, phenomenal growth, which is creating great new increment and tax base into the state, into the metro, start to get choked by not spending money on the less sexy things. And so infrastructure, I think, is a big component. And subcomponent of infrastructure is the education piece. Continue to invest in education at the K through 12 level. Continue to force higher education to come to the table on economic development deals. I think that is something that is lacking and is going to be looked at in the wave of the future. Get your public and private four-year presidents and board chairs and whomever else from higher ed to come start joining you guys on these big economic development pursuits. That will go a long way, and there are not a lot of places that are doing that well right now. So the governor of the future should put some money there as well. From a labor perspective, you still got to make sure that you're paying a wage, even at the higher end levels, that allows people to find housing that's going to suit their familial status and their need. So I think, look, the room to roam, all of the pluses about Denver and Colorado are just massive selling points. I think when you think of quality of life, you do need to look at it through the lens of outside of the executive and the C-suite and the high-level finance jobs. Is Metro Denver a place that can be accretive to solving for how kind of middle management, lower end staff, those starting out in their career, can they look at a Denver as a place that's going to be suitable for them to live and launch their career, and therefore be talent that is retained and isn't looking to go to another location or take an option that's going to be more advantageous for their family or for their pocketbook. Had a crystal ball and could predict this, none of us would be sitting here, right? We would be acting on whatever that development plan was, and we'd all retire in a couple of years. I think the reality is, as I said earlier, downtown office space in your large top 10, 20, 30 markets across the country clearly have inflated vacancy right now by virtue of the fact that places still are occupying the space. They just don't have people inside of it. Just like any good economic development project, no two are truly identical. So you have companies right now that are desperately looking to get people back in the office from a workforce or a culture perspective, or at best working to offer the office space as a location for folks to escape their home, whether it's school and childcare related issues, flexibility, work-life balance, whatever it might be. You have other companies that are saying quickly, and you're hearing it right out of your neighbors to the west in Silicon Valley, where everybody is fighting to see how long they can keep their people out of the offices, right? Now you don't have to come back to the office until the end of 2021. And I think the reality is you're going to see some companies take down more office space to be able to provide that office experience, but running away from the densification factor that everybody was chasing for a long period of time. How long that lasts, nobody knows. I think there are others who are using this opportunity. If you take the mindset of a CFO who says, don't let any opportunity go to waste. This presents just, lack of a better word, just an awesome window of opportunity to right-size footprints, but also make large systematic changes to the workplace if required, either that being from a technology standpoint or the way companies from an office standpoint have functioned for the last 10 years to 20 years. I think downtown to suburban, which was part of your question, Chicago is a great market as an example of that. Anyone that has spent time here, can clearly point to the Hoffman Estates of the world, where Sears once upon a time was a large headquartered base, to the northern suburbs north of Chicago, where you had tons of Fortune 500s that had set up operation there, many of which have flooded downtown Chicago. History always repeats itself. I think there will be a transformation back to the suburban markets in some of these locations. Go look at New York City, right? Look at home purchases in outside of Manhattan into the Connecticut suburbs and into greater New York. Same thing is starting to happen here in Chicago. For the first time in probably 20 years, homes are flying off the shelf in northern Cook County and southern Lake County, which just 12 to 24 months ago, if you were trying to sell a house in Lake Forest, that might sit on the market for half a year.
Well, from a place to live perspective, growing up in the Midwest, originally from St. Louis, it's kind of like what I wish I always had. You get all the West Coast amenities and still the Midwest flavor and people. So I think, you've got that part down between all of the outdoor activities and just the amount of amenities and things to do. That's some of the hardest parts that I can think of a lot of communities struggle with. From a business perspective, I kind of view Metro Denver as the same thing as like Charlotte, and which is just below that notch to be the next Atlanta, the next Houston, the next Dallas, an amazing airport that really outpunches probably the weight of what the region should have, which is phenomenal. Your peer cities that aren't growing as fast are really jealous of that airport, and it really opens your opportunities. VF was mentioned earlier. That's operating a corporate Fortune 500 headquarters. You cannot do that without a major airport, and you have to have that hub status and major carriers. So I think that's always good. Maybe to pivot a little bit, I think the one thing that might be missing still is that solid, everyone knows corporate patron. This is the Amazon with Seattle, Coke and all the Turner organizations in Atlanta, Bank of America, Charlotte has that kind of flavor. Denver has some of those. It's lacking that one that everyone thinks of. But I think it's on that precipice of taking that next step to be, one of the super global hubs, or whatever you want to call it, which puts you on that short list of the Atlantas, the Dallases, the Houstons, where it's 5 million, 7 million plus people in the region. Like a Charlotte, where you have, for the size of your market, a airport that really outpunches its weight, and it is going to lead to the path is there to be the next Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, those types of markets where it's multiple corporate headquarters, coming down the pipe, and that's certainly the trajectory that you have. Now that being said, there's a long list of cities that had that same growth pattern and fell off, and I think the gas pedal has to be to the floor to reach that, and I'm excited to see where it heads.
One of the things that is a common theme with pretty much everybody I talk to, all of the clients that I've worked with in the past, is that Denver and Colorado in general, all of the areas in Colorado are very sophisticated and professional when it comes to working with the company and what their needs are, what they expect, what they need in order to be successful here. And so that's a real plus that I found over the years in working with Colorado. The other thing that I really like is that it doesn't matter whether the company is a big name or a no name, a huge investment or a fairly small startup, a growing company. Each of them, at least so far that I've worked with, have all received the same level of service and the same level of attention and responsiveness from the local authorities as well as from the state level, which has been really awesome. I think that I'd mentioned earlier in my comments that the extreme conditions, in the country and in the world seem to be exposing, problems and concerns and challenges that might have been underlying in different communities. And the great thing about Colorado, at least that I've seen so far, is that nothing's really changed. I mean, in terms of the company's ability to operate successfully, there hasn't been any surprises, no big strange changes in an operating environment that a company didn't foresee coming or that's impacted them any worse than any other place. So I think that that's a real compliment to the depth of the ability to operate and be successful here in the state.
Yesterday, I talked a little bit about how most of the communities, if not almost all of them, with just a couple of exceptions I can think of, do a really good job of being responsive to all companies that are looking to locate in Colorado or to grow in Colorado, regardless of how big they are, how big and well-known their names are, whether they're a no-name. I would encourage local officials to continue that practice, or if they're not doing it well, to get on board and start to really give each company the time and attention that they deserve. I'm thinking of a couple of companies that I helped locate in Colorado. It's probably been about 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, they were just barely coming out of the ground and in loss positions and weren't expecting to make a profit for at least 3 or 4 years. And now I think that they're probably one of the biggest employers in the city, at least, and doing extremely well. So I would encourage communities to continue that practice.
I would add just 2 brief things. One would be, we're in a difficult situation for local communities and state governmental entities with fewer tax collections to work with. And I think it's really important to continue to financially support your economic development professionals. I've likened it to that's the next wave of first responders. And that's not at all to put any of us on a platform with healthcare workers, police and fire, police officers, firefighters, but economic development professionals, especially at a local or regional basis, are going to be absolutely vital to rebuilding all of our economies where we live and work. So I think providing that strong support is really important. And the other thing is just efficiency and speed, especially in an environment like this, coming out of COVID or coming out of a recession, whatever it might be, being able to move through a process quickly. And yes, accountability And accountability is very important, transparency is very important, but speed to market is going to be very important, and the places that are prepared will be very successful coming out of this.
If you were coming to town with a client that had an office related function, I think if there's a weight of a criteria, Sam, this won't be a shock to you, but I think 75% of that conversation is going to be around talent, sourcing it, competition for it. And it's all about talent. So, I think if you've got a site visit and you've got folks looking at the criteria, I think right now the talent piece hasn't disappeared. Again, I keep saying it. I think the access, the quotient for global access is massive depending on what type of user you are looking for. If it's an FDI related project, Denver Metro Airport is a massive needle mover for the ability to get back overseas, whether you're going east or west. The only thing that I would add there is, next time I'm in town, Sam, last time we were together, you guys did a really good job of throwing up a map and pointing out development. That was all pre-COVID. I think you want to be able to still tell that same story. And my hope is that, developers haven't picked up their toys and ran home. But where is that new multifamily housing evolving? How is the metro continuing to expand to make it that it's not just the CBD, which is the core look, the tech centers and the Greenwood Villages areas to the north, and how those play into different types of scopes and strategies. And then finally, if you turn all that on its side and you're talking about an industrial project, supply chain is going to be king every single time. Where's the raw material coming from? Where are your core customers? Where are your suppliers? How can you move the product? Is it perishable? What is that going to look like? I think there is a perception in the marketplace that you guys are doing better at combating, but I think you can be louder about it. Yeah, happy to. And I think this is a common discussion when you talk about regional economic development. I would make the argument to anyone here that regional economic development, regardless of where you are in the country, is a successful model, one that plays, one that communicates clearly, and one that I think, rising tides, help everybody float, I think is the reality. And a win for the region is going to be a win, regardless of where that lands in the metro, is going to be a win for all, from recipients to housing, to recipients to tax revenue, whether that be property or wage related, whatever it might be. So look, at the end of the day, I think marketing efforts should be cohesive. If you are so lucky to be part of a region with a strong group, such as Metro Denver or Greater Phoenix or Greater Columbus or the Greater Minneapolis, I think there's no reason not to hitch your wagon to that cart and run with it. One thing that I think can be not so frustrating is not the right word, but the disjointedness comes across when, JJ, your group has all these partners, and then those partners contribute, and you and Sam does a great job of screaming from the song sheet about why Metro Denver. But then you start to have individual communities kind of go back home and say, well, we're gonna go promote ourselves as well. And depending on how that comes across, sometimes that looks rather disjointed, and I hear it all the time. Well, we can stand on our own 2 feet, and absolutely you can. I think if you're looking to market, and you're looking to market to us, but you're also looking to market to the uneducated consumer or the corporate executive who's reading an article or happens to be flying through Denver and sees a billboard, whatever it might be, you don't want them to walk away scratching their head. You want them to think, wow, that's one cohesive message, just like Larry talked about in Georgia and in Atlanta. So let the marketing dollars go to work for you.
Marketing budgets are always the first to go, right? And it's such a classic kind of mistake in my mind. But, it doesn't matter what you do if nobody knows about what you're doing. And so marketing is critical. It remains critical. And I certainly agree with my colleagues that the regional perspective is the way to go.
By everybody. So I'll just mention briefly, marketing dollars are incredibly precious, and especially in an economic environment like we're in now. And it doesn't make sense for a region, whether it's Denver or anywhere else, to have local communities go out and try to create a brand for their individual community. You know, all successful metropolitan regions not only have a strong regional economic development group, but they've developed a strong regional brand. And that 9-county area in the Denver metro area is known as Denver. Embrace it. There's a lot of goodwill and positive thoughts built into that Denver brand right now, and take full advantage of it.